This video is a part of the STEM Teachers Professional Development Project in Kyrgyzstan for the 2021-2022 year. This video is produced by the Lingua Innovative Education Foundation with the support of the U.S. Embassy in the Kyrgyz Republic as well as the Kyrgyz Ministry of Education. So hello and welcome. So with this video, we are going to conclude the experiential learning, the contrast between a student and a teacher-centered lesson. And I'm going to try to show you how and why you might want to be doing that as part of your own teacher training work. So to get right down to it, we're here on my computer screen, and I'm going to just, first of all, show and tell for you a number of different resources I have available. First of all, let's get that out of the way. I want to share my resources with you. So first of all, this QR code will allow you to access on Google Docs the lesson plan for this interactive lesson. And in a moment, we'll talk through this lesson plan. But there you go. That's the QR code to download that document. The second QR code will allow you to download a PPT, which you don't need to use necessarily for yourself, but you can certainly download it and have a look at it. It follows the same basic lesson plan that it follows the lesson plan as outlined in the plan. It follows the lesson plan as outlined in the plan, and you can certainly use that. We'll quickly run through that in a few moments as well. And the third, so there you go, that's the QR code for the PPT following the lesson plan. And finally, we have a QR code for a third PPT, which you might also find useful. This PPT is really, there's nothing much to it other than it is a potential list of contrast between a teacher and a learner-centered lesson. Again, something you can feel free to use in your own teacher training sessions, but I think, the main reason I'm sharing it with you is for you to be creative and to think for yourself of what kind of resources you might like to have ready for your own teacher training session. So that's the sort of housekeeping. 3 documents available to you. Now, I think it's worth at this point, before we go into the details of the how, I'm thinking that it might be worthwhile to spend just a quick minute thinking about the why. So, first of all, the idea of experiential learning, and I want to show you here. This is a really useful little diagram. This is Kolb's learning cycle, and it is this idea of learning through experience and learning by doing. This is something that as a teacher trainer I strongly believe is an effective technique for modeling your teacher training sessions and for modeling in general all of your learning experiences, especially when it comes to STEM and when we're thinking about developing skills rather than just taking in knowledge. This idea of these 4 steps here. We start with the concrete experience, and in this case the concrete experience in our teacher training session is this experience of being a student doing this origami lesson in one of 2 different ways. Then this idea of reflective observation, so thinking about how was that experience, how did it go for me, using that reflection to then maybe make some more general conceptualizations, so make some generalizations about, well, what does this mean in general for student-centered learning, for teacher-centered learning? And then active experimentation. This is the part that happens then later on in the classroom. So, I've learned this about student-centered learning. I've seen its effectiveness, so now I'm going to go and try. I'm going to go and use these techniques in my own classroom. So this is why we set up this kind of an experience for the learners, and why we don't just tell them about it, but why we allow them to experience it firsthand. So let's now look at, I'll quickly take you through this lesson plan. I guess the one key thing to understand is that this is the lesson as it's designed is set to be a jigsaw learning experience. Now, I think probably some of you have probably heard this concept of jigsaw before, but for those who haven't, just very, very quickly, the idea of a jigsaw learning experience is that you are setting up groups in a different format. So you can see in this diagram here, we've got 4 groups in this first round. They're called expert groups because these 4 groups are having a specific input or a specific experience that's different for each group. So, whatever, in a STEM lesson, this group is reading an article about snakes, this group is reading an article about lizards, this group is reading an article about alligators, this group is reading an article about some other reptile. And then the idea being that, so now we've got these expert groups that have all had a different input or a different experience, and then in round 2 we mix the groups. So we've got one guy that's read about snakes, one guy that's read about lizards, one guy that's read about this and that. Now, in our teacher training session, we're also doing it as a jigsaw experience, but we're doing it with those 2 different lessons. So the important point to keep in mind is that after the lesson, let's go back to the lesson plan here. After they've had this initial process, which is outlined here in part 1, they're going to be pairing up. So one person who had the teacher-centered lesson and one person who had the student-centered lesson, they're going to come together and share their experience. That's the reflection aspect of it. But the important thing to keep in mind, what that means, is that this really works best with two trainers who are prepared to do it. So one trainer will be teaching in a student-centered manner, one teacher in a teacher-centered manner, and ideally you'll be doing the exact same thing. In the videos you watched with me, I was using the same learners and I was teaching them one lesson after the other. So those students were in both lessons. In your teacher training session, the way I'm suggesting you do it, half of the group is off doing it with a teacher-centered teacher, half of the group is off doing it with a learner-centered teacher. So then when they come together, they can compare their experiences. So again, for this to work, at least the way it's designed in this lesson plan, is you want to have 2 trainers, both of them ready to do this origami. So again, in terms of your preparation, you need to both be ready to do the origami task. And in my lesson, we were doing, one of the lessons was folding a frog, one of them was folding a cube. It's really up to you what you want to do, but you need to be ready to be a bit of an expert yourself on it. So a very simple Google image search and you'll get plenty of options to see the diagrams for how to fold. You could also just use something that you already know. Just looking here, I think this one here, this seems like a little bit more complicated one. This one right here, this is the one that I actually used in my lesson. So again, you want to keep it fairly simple. You don't want something super complicated that's going to take a really long time. On the other hand, you don't want to do an origami that, let's say, is very, very basic and that you kind of assume that most people already know. So maybe if you make like that little boat or the little flower, it might be one that pretty much everybody in your class already knows how to do. So that's not going to be really a valid learning experience. So anyway, origami frog, plenty of places that you can teach yourself on the internet. Origami cube, again in my lesson, I think it was it was this was the model that we were using, a simple origami cube. But either way, I mean, you decide yourself which of those things you want to do. And yeah, set it up as a jigsaw. Going back to the lesson plan, let me bring that back up. So yeah, the idea is that each teacher is going to be teaching in a particular style. Now, let's see. I just want to point out here, very often, in my own experience conducting this lesson, the teacher-centered teacher, or the deductive style teaching teacher, there is this idea that they should teach a bad lesson. And you might want to role play being a kind of a poor quality teacher, very strict, very angry, very, very terrible. And you don't necessarily want to do that. You want to give them an honest example of that style of lesson. And I've got a couple of, I've got bullet lists here sort of suggesting how you might act as an inductive teacher, or as, a student-centered teacher. A few tips on how you might run your lesson. But again, you should make this lesson your own. So, you as a teacher trainer, you have your own beliefs and ideas about how a student-centered lesson should be conducted. You have some key concepts yourself of what you think works, and what you think are the key differences. So make it your own. But you can certainly read through here to get some ideas, some tips about how the inductive teacher might act, and similarly here the deductive teacher, a few tips on how you might run that lesson. And again, you just have to be thinking about, well, what do I want to show them? What do I want them to see as the contrast? And just make sure that in those two lessons, those are the things that are, being highlighted and being shown. Again, it's up to you. You don't have to exactly follow this lesson, but these tips are here for you either way. And then, the second, if we go back and look at the diagram again, this idea of experiential learning. So doing that with them, that's the concrete experience. But really important, you don't just do it, you do it and then you talk about it and think about it. So that's this idea of the reflective observation, which is the next stage of the process. That's where, after the jigsaw experience, after they've both been experts in these two, participants in these two different lessons, they come together and then share their ideas. Now, if you think about it, it's quite an important aspect of, what will the reflection questions be? How will those reflection questions work? I've got here a sample of, of some of the questions you might use, you might consider. What did you learn? How do you know you learned it? How did you feel during the lesson? How did you work with whom, etc., etc. I think a really important thing here is to consider this initial question, what did you learn? How do you know you learned it? There is this idea of, well, I actually did something. There is that element of sort of assessment, or the proof of learning is that I created the product. If someone already knows how to do it, you want to make sure to point that out, that, well, no, you didn't learn to do to fold this thing if you already knew how to do it before you came into the lesson. Again, take a look at these questions. You can certainly feel free to use these questions if you want. You can use your own as well. I think there's a good case to be made for a balance of open-ended questions. So really, as the participant, what do you want to say about that experience? That's maybe why we want to ask this question, how did you feel during the lesson? But also some specific things. So flagging, how does the teacher deal with mistakes? Maybe that's something that to you is an important contrast. So, I've included this question: what happened if, when or if you made a mistake? And maybe the reaction of the teachers in those two different styles of lessons is going to be quite different. And anyway, after that, we want to try to pull out these feelings, these opinions, these ideas, and try. I've said here, ideally, the following open class discussion should be as organic and learner driven as possible. So again, this is just my own personal philosophy of, as a teacher, I don't have a really strong agenda in terms of, they must make this point, they must answer this question now, they must answer that question. What did you think? Let's hear your ideas, let's hear your thoughts. And to me, that's the kind of the main important thing. And then, as a form of recap review, use the review PPT slides. So again, we'll come back to this to the PPT and just show you how you might use that. The first few slides are just going through share your. So here we go. Share your experience, what just happened, describe in as much detail, compare and contrast what happens in your partner's classroom. So you can see this is a little different than in the lesson plan. The first stage is just this very open-ended what happened. Again, you can choose to do it like that if you wish. And then here, I think these are pretty much exactly the same questions as we had in the lesson plan. Feel free to edit these questions. If you think, oh, I really want them to notice this thing, well, okay, put a question in there that will elicit that response from your teachers. And then here afterwards, we don't have the actual discussion. You know, obviously the discussion is not happening on the PPT slides, but we do have these, let's say they can be sort of considered more technical aspects where we're showing them some of the differences between a teacher-centered and a student-centered, or an inductive and deductive lesson, as we're calling it here. Matching the sort of opposite aspects, mentioning some of the key points about learner-centered lessons, and yeah, deductive versus inductive methodology, some of the key points. And hopefully, hopefully this is it's called review because ideally most of this stuff has already come out in the class discussion. And then stage 3, and let's again just quickly look at this idea of the learning cycle. So we had this experience, we've thought about it, we've talked about it, maybe we've tried to make some abstract generalizations about learner-centered and teacher-centered classrooms, and now what are the implications for teaching STEM? So now we're trying to look into the future about us as classroom teachers, as STEM teachers, and thinking about, well, do we want to do this in a teacher-centered fashion, or is really a learner-centered approach better for these kind of STEM lessons? Here we've got some kind of buzzwords, some of the key concepts that are, student empowerment, collaboration, building upon existing knowledge, critical thinking, learner engagement, communication. Hopefully a lot of these concepts have already come out. And finally, the $1 million diagram. So again, this idea of, we're trying to develop these skills, and skills are developed by practicing them, by doing stuff. And in this, in this particular origami lesson, we could say, well, yeah, we've done some creative problem solving by thinking about what we're doing. We've maybe collaborated with our partner. I mean, you can obviously go through all of this and see which of these aspects were happening during the lesson. But again, this idea of, these are the kind of skills that happen when you allow peers to work together and when you allow them to problem solve rather than just sort of working lockstep. I'm telling you, do this, do this, do this. Obviously, that's not conducive to this kind of a skills development. So there you go. I just want to very quickly give you one last view here of the second PPT. And this PPT is really nothing special. All it is a filled-in chart showing the contrast between a teacher and a learner-centered lesson. It's different from in the other PPT, but again, you make of it what you will. Maybe some of the ideas there you'll find useful, maybe some not. Just as a way of let's say kind of partly it's a conclusion, partly it's again just trying to sell you on this idea. These are all common sayings that I'm sure we've all seen them in various places. Seeing is believing. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. And show, don't tell. And all of these are really strongly in support of this idea of providing the students with a meaningful and learner-centered experience during their lessons rather than looking at it from a deductive and teacher-centered point of view. So guys, for now that's it. I really do hope that these examples and that these documents will give you some of the tools to present this idea to your teachers in your own teacher training sessions, and good luck with that. And again, thanks. Bye for now.